Go. Welcome back to another episode of TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Stasia, and with me here is Angela. How you going, Angela?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. So what's been happening this week for you?
Well, I'm a bit excited that we're out of lockdown because
yeah.
that allows me to catch up with my TERFy friends.
Awesome.
That's pretty exciting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. This last 3 months has been really hard. And I'm looking forward to getting out and being part of society again.
Lovely. Yeah, and it's just in time for really good weather as well.
Yeah.
Now I understand you've got some TERFy action coming up.
Action. On the 30th of this month, there's action for women, Chalk About It, where we write political slogans and things about women's rights in chalk. And myself and a number of other women are meeting at various spots around the city and doing some drawings.
Lovely.
It's perfectly legal if you're on, a public footpath. And if you don't write anything offensive, it's perfectly legal. So that'll be a bit of fun. If anyone wants to get involved, that they can contact us via this page.
Yeah, there's a lovely woman, I think she lives out near Ballarat somewhere, who
Kate
came up with this idea, and it went really well last year, and there were international people participated as well. So I'm just going to be staying close to home. There's a nice paved walking path that gets a lot of people up and down it right near my house. So
nice.
I'm going to go out there at the night before in the dark and write some TERFy slogans.
Yeah. Unapologetic TERFy.
That's it. Have you seen the footage from the Netflix protests?
Oh, I have. It's hilarious. But to me, from my limited experience of attending protests where there's trans activists, like you could be anywhere in the world and it's the same crowd. They're all chanting cult-like slogans. They're all like disheveled looking and angry, and they have this like religious fervor. But it so quickly escalates into aggression. Like you'll have people just walking through, and all of a sudden, these people are physically in their spaces. They're not standing on the other side of the street having a peaceful protest. They seem to feel like they are entitled to encroach on anyone that walks past. It's quite actually scary. I've been on the receiving end of it. It's quite scary.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that, because you've encountered it at IWD a couple of years in a row.
Yeah, no, there's been a couple of times I've turned up to women-only conferences and things like that around the city where trans activists have been present to protest. But this particular protest is we turned up at the International Women's Day March last year as a group of women who wanted to, not protest, but wanted to bring awareness to the threat on our same-sex rights. And I was carrying a sign that's become a little bit infamous, and it said, "Protect women's sex-based rights," which in its own right is not offensive. But these trans activists took offense to it and decided to spend the entire march trying to exclude us. There's like 9 of us to begin with, and ended off with 7 of us because one of our women was injured. She was actually pushed over by a trans activist. We started as 9 women, and all we were doing is peacefully walking in a women's march with signs. And there were representatives of trans sex workers there, and they had a whole bunch of like pimps and johns and just revolting men, men, not trans women, visibly intimidating us women and telling us we were not welcome at that march. Real sinister turn of events, they got very aggressive and started trying to grab our signs and smash them up. And the police actually had to come and protect us. And for a bunch of lefties who are like ACAB and not really wanting to get involved with the police, we were really grateful for their presence because, there was an element of that march, mainly males and trans identifying people, who were violent and aggressive towards us. And we were like a ragtag bunch of women, a couple of younger women, but, we're talking middle-aged women like myself, older women, grannies, women in wheelchairs. We were just a ragtag bunch of women. We didn't look like activists, and yet they still thought that they could attack and exclude us. Yeah, so we were grateful that the cops protected us, and they actually enabled us to complete the entire length of the march. Awesome. But at the end of the march, we had a bunch of union thugs, and they reckon they weren't in the union, but they had like the CFMEU like flags on their arms, and some of them had union t-shirts or different unions. And because the march was organised by Trades Hall, it was clearly a union thing. We had them come and try and exclude us from the speakers at the end of the march. So a group of men and unionists tried to exclude a group of women from a Women's Day march. Now, you know, I'd been scared to that point because I thought, geez, you know, if we wander off from this march, we're going to get bashed, because they were just like they were in that video in my physical space, you know, 6 foot men towering over me saying, oh, you're TERF, you're not welcome here, you can expletive. Yeah, so but at the end, we were marched on by these self-appointed guardians of the march, and they used military tactics on us. Basically, they used military tactics on this bunch of 7 women, where they tried to corral us using intimidation, and them all lined up in a group going 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and we're trying not to laugh, but it was so offensive because we were women. They're protecting our sex-based rights. We had a right to be there, and we were being excluded by men, and they were doing it openly as union representatives. It was despicable, and I really got my back up. Yeah. But we actually, the trans activists, we had to be escorted from that event by the police, and they're all going, yeah, F off TERFs. But in reality, we were at risk, and the police removed us because they could do so with safety. Otherwise, we would have been attacked. You know, they would derange these people. And I've got video footage because I've been told, oh, it's bullshit, never happened. We've recorded all of it.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. If you go out to these marches, people, you've got to have someone there recording the whole time. I went to a protest at Melbourne Uni that was organised by trans students. Against Dr. Holly Lawford-Smith, and I managed to capture that footage of this, you know, pig male, not even a trans woman, just a dude throwing water on one of our members, Cheryl, and you know, that's assault. She could have followed through with that and reported it. And what we didn't record though was afterwards, as Cheryl and some others were walking away, this giant hulking trans woman is following along behind them with a couple of other guys. And then when we got off the Melbourne Uni grounds and we're just waiting on the street, we had no idea how we were going to get away from these guys. And so me and another woman, Jasmine, jumped on a tram and left. They didn't follow us, and the rest of the women ordered a maxi cab so that they could get to safety. So, you know, it's getting really serious out there. It's so dangerous. And, you know, to have the bloody union, male-dominated unions, of course they have a vested interest. I just think, look, I used to work at the Port of Melbourne. So I think I was, out of 400 employees, I was one of about 10 women working on site. And you think about that kind of male culture. And you know, they're all with the Maritime Union of Australia. Of course, they have a vested interest in keeping prostitution legal and easy for them to access. They got no fucking right being at an International Women's Day march. Just disgusting.
They're thugs.
Shame on you.
It was funny because I remember Women's Day marches from 20, 30 years ago, and they were joyful events. They were celebratory. But since men became involved, probably within the last, 5, 6, 7 years, and since the unions have got heavily involved and men have marched, men have been carrying flags at these marches, and they've become involved, and they've all become just about trans women's rights and just about sex workers' rights. Now, as far as I'm concerned, they're not women. They're women's issues. But advocating for the rights of those two groups are not women's rights.
No.
They're against women's rights,
Exactly.
I think The disclaimer when we're talking about how dangerous these events are, though, is that I don't want to discourage anyone from participating, because the reason that we are targeted is because we are so small in numbers. Now, I'm 5 foot, and you know, I'd do it again tomorrow. You know, if I genuinely thought women would be in danger, I wouldn't encourage people to participate in live action. But because I believe that if we have enough women, even women in costumes that don't want to get doxxed, or, you know, women that just want to film or whatever, but if we have enough representation, then they will stand back. They will leave us alone, because they know we're filming their behavior. The word's getting out about how aggressive and violent and woman-hating all these men are. And, you know, the more women come, the less that small little core group of women are going to be attacked.
Yep. And yeah, that's it. Strength in numbers. We're hoping to get at least 50 of us, us TERFs, at International Women's Day here in Melbourne next year. That's in March. There have also been whispers and rumours that, what is it, the Trade Union Council, what do you call it, Ange?
Well, there's whispers that they're cancelling the next year's march. They don't want to be involved because of COVID, right? But we had COVID last year, and my personal opinion, and they're going to disagree, is that they are going to cancel it. They're going to, you know, not run the march because of all the crap that we, especially me, caused them. I mean, my dad was a unionist. He, you know, I was brought up around the union movement, you know, at the protest, around the campfire, around the old men's legs, you know. So, you know, I've been a union member all of my working life. So, you know, they shit on me. I'm not gonna take it well. And, you know, their behavior towards us was despicable last year. And I actually think they're cancelling it because they're ashamed. And so they should be.
It's a huge conflict.
It is.
And it's crazy that unions are supporting this. It's like, you know, so many women object to gender identity trumping women's sex-based rights in legislation, and men. It makes me wonder about their whole concept of solidarity.
Exactly.
What are these unionists thinking?
Any socialist worth their mettle understands class analysis, and they understand that in a patriarchy, woman is an oppressed class. So, you know, if you understand that, then you can understand that a man who self-identifies as a woman is not oppressed. So, you know, it's socialism 101, and all these unionists, you know, should understand that. And they should also understand capitalism and how, you know, their unions, just like all of these other organisations, are being drip-fed money and influence and power from these LGBTQRSTU orgs who have no interest in the LGB, but who are front for the vested financial interests of big pharma and trans. Now, I sound like I should go get the tinfoil, right? I'm a skeptic, but if I'm you know, putting myself out there saying there's vested interests in this, I'm not going to do it unless I've seen enough proof.
That's it.
Now, we've been going on and on and on about this for years. Last week, a video dropped from the UK involving Stonewall, which is the UK version of ACON, which is over here. Now, ACON was started during the AIDS crisis to support gay men through AIDS, but it was also to raise awareness of LGB issues. They, you know, they got through the AIDS thing. They eventually changed, you know, the community attitude towards LGB people by allowing same-sex marriage. You know, there's all these wonderful things that they achieved for LGB rights. But after same-sex marriage, they didn't have another goal, did they? And transgenderism seems to have come into the political sphere and the social sphere on the back of same-sex marriage. Is that what you call it? Same-sex marriage? Or, but, you know, this is their cash cow. Transgenderism is the thing that's bringing ACON all the money. Now, ACON sounds innocuous, but just like Stonewall in the UK, there are taxpayer funds exchanging hands between ACON and the Education Department, Victoria Police, the ABC, SBS, and all of these orgs that are pro-trans and pro-transing children are all being advised by ACON, because everyone's so worried that about cancel culture, that they want to be seen to be, supporting minorities. So they're all jumping on the bandwagon of, we'll wear the lanyard. Oh, we'll be the special, trans-friendly organisation, because they think they're being intersectional and supportive, but they're only supporting one element of the whole rainbow.
That's right. I don't think a lot of people are aware of the implications of gender identity in legislation and how much it's going to impact society. But, ACON, for those who don't know, stands for the AIDS Council of New South Wales. Now, sorry about this. What on earth does a gay men's charity, what is their business in transitioning teenage girls? They got no right to be doing it. If you look on their website, there's a section that says, who do we support? They list, gay men, trans people, blah, blah. And then women. They don't actually say lesbians. They just say women. They're so far from reality. It just infuriates me. And what you were saying, Angela, about money changing hands between government departments and ACON run this Pride in Inclusion program. So organisations are paying up to $10,000 to join this program, taxpayer money. So many government departments signed up to it. And then you get ACON to come into your workplace and tell you what you need to do to include trans and gender diverse people. I've seen the survey that they send out to employees. So ACON will run a survey for your organisation or government department, and throughout the survey, they just conflate gay, lesbian and transgender, and the needs and the needs of those groups are so different, as we've seen in the UK this week with the first ever LGB Alliance conference.
Yay.
Go UK. Yeah, they're doing such great work over there. I'm not sure if there's going to be videos coming out from that conference, but I really hope that there is.
I think there are actually. Someone made a really good tweet this morning or yesterday. It was the famous artist Birdie Rose. So there's a shout out to Birdie. If she's one of our 3 followers. And she said, that calling it the trans community is dangerous, because what has a 50-year-old man who suddenly decides he's a woman because he's, sexually gets off on the idea of being a woman, what has he got in common with a 12-year-old girl who's uncomfortable about puberty and about hypersexualization of women's bodies and identifies as trans to avoid it? What have those 2 groups got in common?
Nothing. Yep.
Nothing at
that
all.
Was a really good quote.
Interests are vested interests, like their interests clash.
Yeah. That was such a good tweet. I think she summed up what a lot of us are thinking. Yeah. And I've thought the same thing. I remember getting in a comment war with a trans-identified male. And I was saying to him, you've got nothing in common with a girl that's that wants to transition or is calling herself non-binary. You have absolutely no right to speak on her behalf about being trans. It's ridiculous. Oh, makes me so angry.
Me too.
Anyway, so I think just backing up a little bit, I said something about solidarity and you commented, and I think we need to talk about Rex's comment on our first our first video. So
hi Rex, even though you're probably not watching anymore.
So Rex objected to something that you said, Angela, around you said something like, oh, you're okay with trans women that pass using the toilet.
No, I'm not. Yeah.
So let's go into it. Tell us what you really meant.
What I meant was, I'm trying, because when we're speaking here, I'm kind of assuming that a lot of the people watching aren't as clued up as we are. And I'm trying to talk in a way that people who don't know about all what's happening can understand. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is that when we talk about trans women, we're not talking about passing women, because there's a big difference between what we know are out there, the autogynephile who presents exactly like a bloke but has either breasts or makeup, or who is visibly male. There's a difference in our visceral reaction to them as there would be to someone you don't notice immediately that they are trans. People say, oh, but you always notice. Yeah, but sometimes you don't. Like, in my experience, I've met throughout my life people who are fairly passing. And I personally am not as intimidated by them, because they're not the sort of people that go into women-only spaces. They are more likely to avoid being in situations where they may be clocked, because their dysphoria is so great that they would, rather go home than go to a woman's toilet, things like that. So, I think it was important to me to point out the difference between someone who is passing, who has dysphoria, and someone who is the average trans identifying male who walks into a woman's toilet and goes, "Excuse me, I'm a trans woman and I'm here."
Can I just say, I'm a lady? I don't like to use female pronouns for any male, no matter how well they pass. Like, I call Blair White he. However, I grew up with someone who is trans identifying. And because we've had that conversation about, look, I know you've got a mental illness and this is important to you. I don't actually believe that you can change sex, but because I care about you and this is important, I'm going to call you your preferred pronoun. Like, because I've had that conversation, then I'm comfortable to do that, even though I still call that person by their actual birth sex. I think I would prefer it if we could just call them men, trans women, we could just call them men blanket. But while we are still in the awareness stage as far as the public is concerned, I think it's up to people's discretion and what they're comfortable with. Personally, I wish we could just tell it how we think it is. However, the backlash against us will be great. I personally, I don't expect other people to put themselves at risk because I'm willing to do it myself, because I'm quite outspoken and I'm not a known TERF. If I call a man, that's okay for me. But the consequences of that kind of honesty on the average person in their workplace and things like that, we've seen women in the UK getting arrested for tweets, for God's sake. And all they've done is, I've been banned from Twitter for calling Laurel Hubbard a man. And he is a man. So I think, I agree hypothetically, like I 100% agree with Rex that we should never ever call them something that they're not, particularly not call them women, because we're women and they're not us. However, we're human and it's a delicate balance, It is, it's a delicate balance, it's a very personal decision, and I can't wait for the time that I can call trans women men and not suffer extreme consequences of that. Okay, I'll tell you what I think regarding the toilet situation. Originally, when I first stumbled into this whole mess, my feeling was, you know what, if they've had the surgery and they've gone through all that, that's fine. I don't mind them being, I don't mind those transsexual women using women's toilets. And I said that in a comment in a Facebook group, and another woman replied to me, and she was very calm, and she said something along the lines of, but you need to understand that there are women like me who are not comfortable with that, and we need solidarity. And that was like when I was like, yeah, okay, I get it.
I agree.
I get it. I don't think that any males, regardless of their gender identity, should be using women's toilets.
That's true.
But then there are trans women who pass, and who even speaking, you can't tell that they're actually male. They're out there, they exist. And so, you know, if they go into a women's toilets and in a women only space, you're not going to notice. You're not going to know that it's happened. And yeah, it makes you feel uncomfortable knowing that they're out there and doing that, and that they get this sort of high, this buzz from passing and getting into women's spaces. It's icky. It is. But I don't know what we can possibly do about it other than develop a 10-second blood test at the door to see if you've got a Y chromosome.
I volunteer. It's interesting though, because when I think of it, you know, my problem isn't with trans women, it's with men, and trans women are men. Now, if I was okay with a man, like I have a son, he's male, I'm okay with my son in my personal spaces, in my, you know, private spaces, because he's my son, because I have an intimate relationship with him. But I would never expect another woman to have my son in their personal spaces. I would never expect that, particularly someone who's, you know, has good reason to be wary of males.
Yep.
Like, you know, so while I'm saying, oh, you know, it's okay for, you know, some men, passing men, to be in certain situations with women, that's my decision to make for myself, but is never my decision to make for other women. And I prioritize the feelings of the other women over, you know, whether I have that male person in my space or not. So, you know, I don't think I can make that decision for anyone else.
That's it. And it's just so outrageous that, you know, liberal feminists have decided that this is okay for all women, when there are a very large number of us speaking out saying, no, it's not okay. And not only that, they're saying no debate. It's like, well, how do you ever expect to achieve some sort of consensus on this, or some kind of compromise? You know, it needs discussion, and here we are.
These are the same women getting upset about, you know, Me Too and the Parliament House rape scandal. They're going, oh, you've got to understand consent, you've got to understand boundaries. And it's like, well, I don't consent to these people in my women only spaces. And they go, oh, no, not that.
It's just crazy.
You know, the cognitive dissonance, they're not getting it. Like they're saying, oh, you know, women's rights, women this, women that. And then as soon as you bring up trans women who are men, not them. You know, you have to consent to them in your spaces. You know, you don't have any choice. It's like, well, trans women don't offend a rate any different from any other male.
That's right. That was a Swedish study, I believe.
Yeah. And even in Australia here, you know, they've noticed since self-IDs come in, they've noticed an increase in females committing, you know, extreme crimes. Now, there could be a number of reasons for that. It could be, you know, other stuff in society, like, you know, pornography and other dodgy stuff. But, you know, as far as reporting statistics in the media, the rise of women committing crimes it corresponds with trans self-ID and, you know, media reporting of biological males as women. It corresponds with this increase. So,
and maybe people out there watching don't know, but because we don't yet have groups doing a lot of work around the prison situation here in Australia, but there is a group in Western Australia, Keep Prison Single Sex WA. They've got a website, you can look them up on Facebook. I did write to Victoria Corrections to find out about their policy. They do allow trans women into women's prisons here in Victoria. It's already happening. Queensland, there is a woman who runs Fair Go for Queensland Women. She's written off a bunch of FOI requests, and there are males being housed in women's prisons. And then, you know, you look at that and you think about you know, these international UN conventions on the prevention of torture. It's like, this is really a cruel and unusual punishment to put women in that position in prison, to have to shower in, because, you know, they don't have doors on the showers in prison. So you got to be naked in front of this like pervy AGP dude that's still got his penis and pretend that it's a woman. And oh, the most outrageous thing a week or two ago coming out of the UK was that women in prison who misgender trans women that are in prison with them can expect to have their sentence increased.
Yeah.
Like misgendering is like this hate crime. Like, give me a break. It's just outrageous.
Yeah. And you know who's overrepresented in prison system here in Australia? Aboriginal women.
Aboriginal women, yeah.
And, you know, women who've suffered, like, you know, domestic
violence,
all sorts of, you know, the things that oppress women. They're overrepresented in the prison system. And who are the least powerful as far as agency are these minority women, and they're the ones being exposed to these biological males. And, you know, who's going to listen to them? People go, oh, you know, victim blame them and say, oh, but you're a crim, you know, you don't deserve any rights. And of course they do. You know, nobody starts off hoping to, you know, be in jail. And also the things that Aboriginal women are convicted of, which are not paying fines, things like that, which are minor offences as far as, you know, offences are concerned, they're being put into, you know, they're being exposed to males who've committed things like sex crimes and violent crimes, and they're being put in the same cells as these blokes. You know, it's just despicable. And all these, you know, social justice warriors who say, oh, you know, like, you know, Aboriginal rights and whatever, they're not thinking about that. And they won't listen. You try and tell them, well, who is, you know, overrepresented in prison in Australia? And they'll go, oh, don't know, you know, and they know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of doublethink on the other side. You know, the word Orwellian gets bandied about, but it is so accurate to this whole debate. Like very early on when I got into this, and I'd yet to find any gender critical groups, so I was sort of floating on my own for about a month trying to process what was happening. And I remember reading something and just saying out loud, this is Orwellian, this is Orwellian. And so speaking of Orwellian, this week someone has discovered that the ABC has actually memory holed a quote from a young man who has a intersex condition or a disorder of sexual development condition, however you want to call it. And he said on film that intersex does not mean trans, something like that. And when the ABC went and made a transcript of this recording, they left that quote out.
Oh,
yeah.
That's the same ABC that interviewed the head of the Melbourne gender clinic and allowed her to lie and say that minors were not having sex reassignment surgery. And I got on Twitter and I said, I know a 15-year-old girl who had a double mastectomy through the public clinic at Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and the ABC ignored it and just went, oh, that. So they didn't say, oh, is that true? They didn't question me about it. They, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if you're the media and someone comes and says, excuse me, you've told a porky or you've left this information out, then they have an obligation to check that information. But no, not the ABC. You can't say anything that falls outside their, you know, cult-like mantras of, you know, what it is to be transgender.
Yep. I actually made an official complaint to the ABC over their Michelle Telfer episode.
Yeah.
Australian Story episode. Because of that, well, I included that bit about, you know, her saying that they don't perform surgeries. I said, I know of a 15-year-old girl that had her breast removed, and their response was, oh yes, maybe that happened, but the gender clinic at the Royal Children's Hospital doesn't perform those surgeries.
They shipped them off to New South Wales.
Yeah, that's it. So Royal Children's Hospital made the referral for this girl to undergo the double mastectomy, but and I just thought, you bureaucratic turds.
I've known that. The child who had it done, I've known her since she was born, and she never showed any sign of even being a tomboy. Wow. And then, of course, you know, it got to 12 and all of a sudden body starts changing, you know, came out as a lesbian, and within, you know, 6 months she's on the gender train. And, you know, so 12 years old, she presents to the gender clinic. A couple of weeks past her 15th birthday, breasts are lopped off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just ridiculous. And the fact that there's no history, you know, and people say to me, oh, you know, your friend who allowed that to happen, you know, where are the parents? Well, with affirmation, the parents aren't allowed to object, because they're told that if they object to their child's demands, their demands to go on hormones, to take a male name, you know, whatever, that their child will kill themselves.
Yeah.
Now, you know, parents have got no idea about this whole gender thing, and then all of a sudden their kid comes home and says trans. They go to their GP because they're worried about their child's mental health, and the GP refers them to a gender clinic, and the gender clinics, all the gender clinics are affirmation only. They're going to believe what the therapists are telling them.
It's trust the experts.
It is. And these parents did. You know, they said, of course we had doubts. We don't want our daughter to do that, but we don't want her to kill herself. We'd rather have, you know, our daughter become our son than we would have a dead child, because that's what they think their choice is.
Mm-hmm. They've really weaponized the suicide angle in this, and it's just outrageous.
And it's without any basis too, because the suicide rates for these kids in that age group are no different from anyone else in that age group, because the ages of 11 to, you know, 16 are a tumultuous time in every adolescent's life. But we only ever hear about trans suicides, and, you know, I wonder, I've never seen the statistics, but I wonder if there was overall statistics for that age group of threats of suicide and suicidality compared with trans and everyone. I think they would look exactly the same.
And look, I distinctly remember Ray Blanchard saying that there is no difference in the suicide rate for the transgender population compared to other mental illnesses.
Yes.
Schizophrenia, bipolar, it's the same. So then it becomes, well, is it because they're trans, or is it because they have a mental illness called gender dysphoria?
Yeah. Well, most of them don't even have gender dysphoria. They're, you know, just weaponizing their fetishes. But anyway, and gender dysphoria is a symptom of trauma. You know, so this denial that trans is a mental illness, while these people are displaying behavior that is clearly comparable with someone with a significant mental illness, this denial is not doing them any favors, because the reason that they want to identify out of their sex is because they have a pre-existing mental health condition.
Yeah,
it's obvious.
Yeah, well, that's it. Look, people don't like these comparisons, but, you know, I think of there are people out there that want a limb removed, and we look at them and say, oh, we think let's go for therapy first before we amputate. And no surgeon's going to amputate a healthy leg.
No.
So what is the difference between that and wanting to be the opposite sex and have this gender reassignment surgery, sex reassignment surgery? I don't see much of a difference there.
This whole myth of sex reassignment surgery, you know, they're being sold a lie, because just because you disfigure yourself and have plastic surgery and hormones. You're never going to actually, it's all cosmetic surgery. It's not actual any sort of reassignment. It's no different from a nose job.
Mm-hmm.
It is cosmetic surgery. It's not this life-changing, essence-changing thing that suddenly matches your head and your body. It's plastic surgery. And everybody knows that if you are unhappy with your nose and you want to have plastic surgery on it, it doesn't guarantee that after the surgery you're going to be happy with your nose, because then maybe, notice a bit of a, like everybody knows that plastic surgery isn't a solution unless you've got like a medical problem or a disfigurement. But just, to do it for vanity reasons, that's not a solution.
Check out Botched, everyone, if you
no, but they do so many unnecessary things.
I know. I used to be a Botched junkie. I really enjoyed it. But I don't know, something's clicked and I've gone off it now. But there was one interesting episode where this guy came in. He'd had a chin implant and it's sort of gone wonky and it looked weird, and he wanted it removed, and so they removed it and it looked fine. And then he came back to the clinic like a month later and said, I'm still not happy with it. I'd like to get another implant. And the surgeons, those two men, they refused and said, look, we think you've got a condition called body dysmorphia, and you should go and seek out, psychotherapy for it. And I just thought, oh my God, in all the years that I was watching that show, I never saw them say to a woman that maybe she had body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
And suddenly, they're willing to protect this man from surgeries he might regret. It's like, oh my God, apply the same thing to the women on your show, for crying out loud.
Well, they wouldn't, because the breast surgery are dry up, because after women have a baby, women have a baby, after women have a baby, you get saggy boobs. And, if they say, that, saggy boobs are normal, then their whole income stream is going to dry up. So, of course, someone's got natural drop of their breasts after childbearing, or a natural tummy after childbearing, they're doing what they do with trans people, and they're saying, oh yeah, that's a legitimate reason to have invasive surgery. But it's also good that show shows the bad side of it when it's not done properly, and the ongoing health issues that people can have. And the trans community doesn't talk about those. Like, I have trans people in my life, and they've had, the women have had to have a hysterectomy before they've finished childbearing age, so in their 30s. They're short, they've got spine issues. There's a whole bunch of health things that occur over a lifetime of hormones. And it really only has been the last sort of 20 or 30 years where they've had any kind of really invasive procedures. So we don't really know the long-term consequences. But I think I read somewhere, I can't remember where, that the life expectancy of a person who has, swaps genders is reduced by at least 15 years. Say if, your average lifespan is, 75, snuff it at 60, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And that's not through suicide, it's through health.
Yeah. And that's the thing, when you removing organs like testicles that play a vital role in regulating your endocrine system, there's going to be problems when you're pumping yourself full of a hormone that your body is not built to process. There's going to be huge problems. And I remember there was a young detransitioner from the US, and what caused her to detransition was that the testosterone had affected her liver. She's having liver problems in her mid-20s or something. Like, come on.
That's so sad.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
I do wonder if in the future there might be a botched TV show for transgender patients that went through this.
That poor old Jazz Jennings, never have an orgasm, never have normal sexual, stuff because their organs didn't develop properly. The whole puberty blockers argument that, we have people getting into their 20s who've got, micro penises and, their sex organs haven't developed properly. It's just horrible.
Yeah,
horrible.
It really is. Yeah. Just backing up a bit, I saw a really funny, clever post today from a father whose son had started identifying as a girl. And so what this father did was he went out and bought women's clothing for himself and started wearing it around the house, and you know, putting this sexy man lingerie in the washing with his son's clothes, and I even started like looking up sissy hypno porn and stuff, and not clearing his browser history so that his son would jump on the computer next and see what his dad had been looking at. And apparently it worked. Very quickly his son just went back to identifying as he is a male. So that's a tip out there for the parents of any teenagers that have suddenly declared a trans identity. Give that a go. Bit of, you know, because kids don't want to be seen to be like their parents, so go for it.
My father-in-law transitioned at age 65.
Yeah,
and I keep forgetting about it because, you know, we haven't seen him for 7 years, but at 65 years old. And it's a sad story. I'll share it another day. But you know, my mother-in-law, his partner of 20-something years, she actually died a couple of years later, and you know, because she sort of was so traumatized by everything that had happened in the last few years. But yeah, at 65 he transitioned, and a couple of years later someone sent me a photo of him as a woman, and he looked like a cross between me and my mother-in-law. And it was really like, wow, you know. It was quite creepy to think that he had, you know, he sort of took on a persona that was, you know, sort of copied off people that were in his life, you know, because we both got, you know, auburn hair, and it was disturbing, you know, it was really disturbing.
Wow, yeah.
I will never see him as an actual woman, you know. He of course has gone on and started a new life and changed his name and got a new career as a nurse, hasn't seen his grandkids or his kids, you know, for 7 years. And it's quite sad actually, but it was really, really creepy to think that someone had been thinking about, you know, transitioning and observing the women in his life, and, you know, and adopted a persona that was like it was a bit like you know, one of those skin suits that the serial killers put together that was made up of the women that he knew, you know. Like initially I thought it was a compliment, but you know, no.
Yeah.
So, it is disturbing.
I can imagine. Yeah, I'd be pretty disturbed by that too. There's a trans woman in the UK who had this, I can't remember the name. This trans woman had a huge public spat with a gender critical woman, and afterwards he went and changed his name to that gender critical woman's name, like, you know, like stealing someone's identity, sort of, you know. It's just icky, isn't it?
But that also fits in, because I know a little bit about psychology, that fits in with the framework of psychiatric disorders, because when someone has some of the personality disorders, their own persona, or their you know, the foundations of who they are as a person doesn't form properly, and usually through trauma. And so the only way that they receive any perception of, you know, any feedback from other people is to see themselves reflected. And so say if someone, you know, doesn't know who they are, the only way that they can exist is if they adopt a persona from somebody else and put it on like a shirt, like they wear an identity. So all this trans stuff where they're going and they're appropriating womanhood, or they're appropriating the characteristics or the names or whatever of actual women, you know, a lot of them give themselves porn star names, and that says something. You know, that is indicative that they have a mental illness, because sane people don't go and say, oh, Stasia, I like you, I'm going to call myself Stasia. It doesn't make sense, you know. So that's one of the markers for these psychiatric disorders, because, you know, people say, oh, trans women are often narcissistic. Well, they are, because you know, they have, you know, mental illnesses, and the characteristics are narcissistic, and they're also, you know, that they can only exist if they're taking something from somewhere else and applying that to themselves.
Mm-hmm. There was actually a study done in Iran, which does have a high number of transgender people for various reasons, including because of homophobia being built into their religious laws. There was a study done there, and it proved it, that there was an incredibly high rate of personality disorders amongst transgender women. It was really high. It was like 60-70% or something like that. So that explains a lot of the behavior that we see on social media and at protests, and this sort of being unable to handle even the most minute criticism. That ties in with personality disorders, definitely, right?
Yeah, and we talk about, we keep going back to trans women because they're the ones who impact on us the most directly.
Yep.
You know, so maybe the next time we chat, we could talk maybe about trans men.
Yep.
Because, you know, we probably seem, oh, you're bashing trans women, and we kind of are, because that's their behavior that is impacting on us most directly. And it's, you know, the demands that men are making to women's rights that concern us the most.
And it's also that we don't hear from trans men very much in this, from the trans movement.
Yeah.
It's trans women leading all this stuff.
Yeah. The trans men I know live quietly, like they live quietly in their lives. You know, they go to the unisex toilet, they don't complain. You know, they just actually want to be left alone. They just want to go about their normal lives. They're not out here, you know, from my generation anyway, they're not the ones out here protesting and demanding that other women accept, you know, what they're saying about trans identified people. Like they're not involved. They don't want to be involved.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to male privilege.
Yeah.
Got to say it. If you have lived as a man for 40 years and then you as if you don't have that male privilege, as if you don't have the privilege that comes simply from having a bigger, stronger body than women. You know, there must be I've often, on occasion, I've tried to imagine, what does it feel like to be a man? And there's just this sort of invulnerability. You can say what you want. You're not going to get smashed in the face by a woman, or you might, but it's rare. So this sort of power comes from having a male body.
And even small men, you compare, even like, you know, my dad was shorter than me. He was stronger than me, you know, he could lift up, you know, the lawnmower by himself and things like that. You know, I couldn't do any of that. So, you know, even, you know, because it's not just about their height or their build. All men are stronger than most women.
Yep. 60% more upper body strength than women. So come on, get real, as if you don't have male privilege, or you trans women in your 40s and 50s. God.
We live in a patriarchy too, you know, and what I was going back saying about class analysis, you know, it's the epitome of male arrogance that, you know, our oppressor can all of a sudden identify as being oppressed. And claim not just to be oppressed and be a woman, but to be the most oppressed and marginalised woman. You know, I can't imagine anything more privileged than that a male can decide at whatever age he likes, that I'm not a man anymore, I'm going to be a woman, and I'm more oppressed than women from religious minorities. I'm more oppressed than refugees. I'm more oppressed than Aboriginal women. I'm more oppressed than, you know, rape victims, you know, and that my demands have to be centered, you know. I can't imagine anything more arrogant and anything more typically male than that.
Yep, that's it. Well, I don't know what time I started recording, Ange, so maybe we'll wrap it up shortly. There was one more thing that I wanted to bring up. At the moment in Australia, there's an e-petition to the House of Representatives at the federal level, requesting that all transgender surgeries be covered by Medicare. So that's by the taxpayer. It's being promoted by Greens Party members online. I don't know what's going to happen. What do you think is going to happen with this? Because they've got over 100,000 signatures, unbelievable.
That's the thing. I think that there's going to be a push. And while we have a Conservative government, I think we're relatively safe. But people don't know what they're supporting. Most people don't know trans identifying people. So they don't, and they believe what the media is telling them, that they're just misunderstood and troubled. And if we give them what they want, then they'll forever feel better. They don't understand what's actually being asked, that any bloke who decides that he's a woman can go and get fake boobs, or, they're asking for something that is so broad. They haven't even the Greens haven't specified to what age. So you will have things like this young children having trans surgery, because they say that it doesn't happen on minors. We know it does. So, and I point that out, obviously, nobody wants to listen. But the general public has deliberately been misled about what trans people are asking for. And that's across everything that they're asking for, but particularly when it comes to surgery. So, if they assume that safeguarding is actually happening. They don't understand that it's affirmation only, and that the minute someone is presenting to a gender clinic, and GPs are signing off going gender clinic, because they don't want the responsibility for them. They just send them straight off the first time they come in. But the minute they walk into that gender clinic, they're affirmed and they're on that road. And the general public just doesn't understand. And that's why, people like us TERFs and, gender critical people, and even professionals like psychiatrists and whistleblowers, people that have previously had a lot of influence over the media, are being shut down and being ignored, are being demonized, because they don't want the public to know what's actually happening. Now, I think that if in a Conservative government, I think we may have some success of not having that go through. But if federal Labor is as woke as, say, Victorian Labor, then we'll be paying for anyone who's trans to have, cosmetic surgery or have, devastating, life-changing surgery on children, before we have things like, women having their stomach muscles repaired after childbirth, or having prolapses repaired, or having reconstructive surgery after breast cancer, because none of those things are covered by Medicare. But, the Greens and the trans lobby are advocating for trans stuff and not for these other things.
I'd like to...
Victims of female genital mutilation to have repair surgery.
I was just going to add that in, actually, because I had a really good, I met the woman who runs Female Genital Mutilation Restoration Australia. I can't remember the name of the organisation. It's the only FGM organisation running in Australia. And she had tried to, we'll have to get her on one day for a chat, actually. She's lovely. She had tried to get surgeons here in Australia interested in doing restorative surgeries on FGM victims. And the surgeon said, no, we don't want to learn because it's all just experimental. And then you now compare that to what's happening to people having phalloplasty and vaginoplasty surgeries. It's just horror story after horror story of complications and having to have multiple surgeries and losing sensation. So you've got sexual dysfunction. It just goes on and some really serious complications. Like I saw one story about a woman who was hemorrhaging for almost 24 hours after she'd had a hysterectomy as the first stage towards a phalloplasty. Another one is you can get in your urethra that's sort of been created for the phalloplasty. You can get these little diversions, which turns into like a little cul-de-sac where urine builds up. And, if you don't get that out of your body, it starts to become infected. And then it goes up, you got a urinary tract infection, and then you've got a bladder infection, and then you've got a kidney infection, and it can lead to sepsis, which is just, you can die from these surgeries, people.
And they're not uncommon. This is the thing, they're not uncommon. The internet's full of them. If you're willing to, you dare to look.
Neovaginadisasters.com. Check it out if you're brave. Yeah.
Horrible stuff.
Yeah.
Horrible stuff. Yeah, so I think it's despicable that they're advocating for that over all these other really, really important life-changing things for the majority of women. You know, because I looked into because I've had 4 kids. And, you know, I looked into, you know, some of these, you know, repair issues, and, you know, the wait for someone to have a prolapse repair is 7 years. Remember that vaginal mesh scandal where they used inferior products because they were just staple next. You know, I looked into that. Yeah. And so 7 years wait. So, you know, there's incontinence, there's all sorts of pain and risk of infection and all sorts of other issues that you can have because you're you know, you've got pressure.
You have a female body.
Yeah, because you've given birth. And it can happen after 1 baby or, you know, or 4 or whatever. But there's so many things that can happen. And there's so many women suffering from these things. A bit like there's so many women suffering from menopause and there's no research into that. There's no advocacy for that. You know, nobody gives a crap. And yet, you know, by numbers alone, you know, thousands, tens of thousands more women are impacted by these things than there are trans people needing breast implants.
Even dental. I'm just going to tack it on.
Yeah, dental. We've all got, like, especially Victorians who haven't been allowed to go to the dentist. Where are you going? Look at the eyebrows, and you can tell someone's from Victoria because they got holes in their teeth, eyebrows, got the regrowth, you know, not for long. Yeah, but it's just really sad, you know, and I'm so sick. You know, it's just so sick of hopping online or opening, you know, an old school newspaper and seeing, you know, all this transgender, gendered, you know, little kids being, you know, dragged out to talk about all that stuff. And then there'll be a tiny little thing, you know, saying research needed into, you know, why blah, 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 women, you know, menopause or something like that. You know, we're just so overlooked.
Yep.
And all this rubbish about, oh, women already have equality. What a load of crap.
No. All right. I think we might wrap it up, Ange.
Yeah, funny because we always start thinking about all the things. Oh, we could talk about this, but there's next time. So if you've got any suggestions about what you'd like us to talk about, pop them in the comments. And, you know, you can be harsh, just don't get personal. But if you don't disagree with us, you know, maybe we can explore it next time, you know, because it's hard to, because this is such a complex issue. It's really hard to get out what you feel, because that changes in all the different, you know, it changes over time. It changes regarding who you're speaking to, who you're speaking about, what context you're in. Like, we couldn't have this conversation, say, in a workplace or something like that, because we'd be in big trouble and get the sack, you know. So, you know, we're trying to flesh these issues out as we're talking about them. So we're really, really open to feedback, you know.
Yep. From any faction of the gender critical camp.
Yeah, sure. And if trans people want to pop into the comments and you know, give us a comment, that's fine too. You know?
Absolutely.
As long as everyone's polite and we don't mind.
Yep.
We're open to criticism for sure.
All right. Let's leave it there. Thanks, Ange. Good to see you.
See you next week.
Will do.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone watching. Bye.
Bye.